The champagne flute was a lead weight in my hand, its glacial chill a stark contrast to the frantic, burning heat under my skin. In the grand ballroom of the St. Regis, every tinkling laugh and crystal clink grated on my raw nerves, tightening the knot of dread that had taken permanent residence in my stomach. A string quartet was playing Vivaldi in the corner, their elegant, harmonious motions a cruel mockery of the violent turmoil churning inside me. The air was thick with the cloying scent of lilies and expensive perfume, a fragrance I now associated with suffocation, with the slow, beautiful death of my own autonomy. On my finger, the diamond was an 8-carat monstrosity, a flawless, mercilessly sparkling stone that captured the light from the chandeliers and fractured it into 1,000 tiny, mocking rainbows. Julian had called it a symbol of his devotion when he'd slid it on my finger in front of a flurry of photographers a month ago. To me, it felt less like a promise and more like a beautifully crafted manacle, chaining me to the man whose arm was draped so possessively around my shoulders. Julian Archer, heir to the Archer media empire, my fiancé, and the meticulous architect of my gilded cage. "Smile, Elara," he murmured, his voice a low, proprietary purr against my ear. His breath was warm, smelling of vintage scotch and the unshakable self-satisfaction of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. His thumb stroked my bare shoulder, a gesture that, to the hundreds of watching eyes, looked affectionate and intimate. To me, it felt like a brand, a constant, physical reminder of ownership. "Our families are making history tonight. You should look pleased." My lips stretched into a painful, brittle imitation of a smile. I could feel the muscles in my cheeks trembling with the effort. He was right. Tonight wasn't an engagement party. It was the public signing of a merger disguised with flowers and champagne. Vance Publishing, the literary legacy my father had poured his life into, the company whose hallways I had run down as a child, was being absorbed by the Archer conglomerate to save it from the brink of bankruptcy. And I, Elara Vance, was the final, non-negotiable clause in the contract. 3 months of a whirlwind courtship, a flood of fawning press releases, and now this lavish spectacle to seal the deal. 3 months of playing the adoring fiancé, while my future crumbled into a carefully managed portfolio. I looked across the room and saw my father. He was locked in an animated conversation with Julian's father, Marcus Archer, a formidable man with a face like a clenched fist and the cold, dead eyes of a shark. My father was laughing, a wide, performative laugh that didn't reach his tired, guilt-ridden eyes. He caught my gaze for a moment, and his smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of deep, desperate apology before he quickly looked away. He had sold me. I knew he believed he was doing it to save us, to save his life's work, but the knowledge did little to soothe the sting of betrayal. He had chosen his company over his daughter. I needed air. The suffocating scent of lilies and ambition was making me dizzy. "I just need a moment to freshen up," I murmured, the excuse tasting like ash in my mouth. I began to slip from his grasp before he could protest, my movements deliberately fluid and graceful, the perfect picture of a composed socialite. His fingers tightened for a fraction of a second, a silent, painful warning that sent a jolt up my arm, before he released me with a polished smile for the benefit of a passing senator. "Don't be long, darling. We have the announcement to make." His words were a threat, a ticking clock that echoed the frantic pounding of my own heart. My heels sank into the plush runner of a deserted hallway, the ballroom's cacophony fading to a dull, oppressive roar behind me. I leaned against the cool marble wall, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The familiar tendrils of a panic attack clawed at my chest, sharp and relentless. My vision swam. This couldn't be my life. I couldn't marry a man whose smile never reached his cold, calculating eyes, a man who looked at me not with love or even affection, but with the triumphant gleam of a collector who had just acquired a rare and valuable piece for his display case. I thought of the way his hands felt on me, always a little too firm, always a gesture of control rather than care. He didn't want a wife, he wanted a subsidiary. That's when I heard his voice, drifting from the slightly ajar door of a private study nearby. It was laced with the same casual cruelty I'd come to recognize when he thought no one of importance was listening. "She's putting on a spectacular show, isn't she?" Julian said. The sycophantic laughter of his friends, Lachlan and Bryce, followed. I recognized their voices instantly. They were his ever-present shadows, vultures in tailored suits who fed on his scraps of power. A bit of a porcelain doll, but her father's company shares are worth the trouble of pretending she has a personality. Once we're married and I have complete control of the board, her old man will be lucky if I let him keep his corner office. A cold wave washed over me, so intense it felt like being plunged into ice water. It extinguished the panic and replaced it with something sharp and brittle. It was a feeling beyond humiliation. It was the chilling recognition of being utterly and completely erased. "And the girl?" Lachlan asked, his voice slick with amusement. "What's the plan for her once the ink is dry?" "She'll earn her place," Julian scoffed, and I could picture the dismissive wave of his hand, the arrogant tilt of his head. "She'll wear the right clothes, host the right parties, and keep her pretty mouth shut. It's what she was bred for. A pretty asset to be leveraged. Nothing more." The floor seemed to drop out from beneath me. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. I had known this was a transaction. I had accepted it, resigned myself to it. But hearing my life, my entire worth, reduced to a line item on a balance sheet, hearing the utter contempt in his voice, broke something deep inside me. The last flicker of hope, the naive, desperate belief that I could somehow endure this, that I could carve out a sliver of dignity within the arrangement, died in that cold, opulent hallway. I wasn't just being married off. I was being dismantled, piece by piece, until nothing of myself would be left. Just a pretty, silent asset. My legs, no longer trembling with panic, but rigid with a terrifying, crystalline resolve, carried me back towards the ballroom's grand, arched entrance. But I wasn't returning to my cage. I was hunting for a weapon. My eyes scanned the sea of oblivious faces, the predators in tailored suits and the smiling sharks in evening gowns. They were all cogs in the same merciless machine that was grinding me into dust. My gaze swept past them, past my father's guilty face, past Julian's smirking friends. I searched for an anomaly, a disruption, a force of nature so powerful it could shatter this entire, perfectly constructed world. And then I saw him. He stood in a secluded alcove near the terrace doors, a specter of shadow and power amidst the glittering crowd. Cassian Thorne, the one man in this entire city whom Julian Archer and his formidable father truly feared. A cruel, ruthless billionaire who had clawed his way up from nothing, building a global tech and logistics empire on the ashes of his competitors. He was a corporate barbarian, a legend spoken of in hushed, fearful whispers in the boardrooms of his rivals. He was broad-shouldered, dressed in a black suit so perfectly tailored it looked like a second skin. His dark hair was swept back from a face that seemed carved from granite, all harsh lines and uncompromising angles. He held a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light as his eyes, the color of storm clouds, swept the room with a predator's coolly assessing gaze. He wasn't a guest. He was an observer, a wolf who had wandered into a sheep pen out of sheer, arrogant boredom. He was Julian's sworn enemy. Their feud was the stuff of financial legend, a bitter war that had started years ago and cost the Archers millions. An alliance with him was unthinkable. An association with him meant social suicide and corporate annihilation. He was perfect. Without thinking, without a plan beyond the primal scream for freedom in my soul, I broke away from the edge of the crowd. The noise of the ballroom seemed to recede, fading into a dull, distant roar. My vision tunneled until the only thing I could see was the dark, imposing figure in the alcove. Pure, unadulterated survival instinct drove me forward. Some desperate, broken part of my brain recognized that the only way to escape a wolf was to run directly to the dragon. To approach him was suicide, but to do nothing was a slow, agonizing execution. Julian saw me. I felt his eyes on me, a hot, angry pressure on my back. His eyes widened, first in confusion, then in a flash of thunderous fury as he realized my trajectory. "Ilara," he hissed, his voice a whip-crack of authority that I had been conditioned to obey for 3 long months. He started to move through the crowd after me, his progress impeded by the very guests he was trying so hard to impress. But it was too late. His anger was a distant storm. The hurricane was in front of me. I reached the alcove, my heart hammering against my ribs not with fear, but with a wild, terrifying thrill that bordered on hysteria. Cashin Thorne's gaze landed on me as I stopped a few feet away, his storm cloud eyes narrowing slightly. One dark eyebrow raised in faint, arrogant curiosity. He had no idea who I was, but he was a man who understood power, and he saw the desperate, calculated determination in my eyes. He saw the hunted look of an animal about to make a final, suicidal leap. "Please," I whispered, the word a fragile puff of air. It was the last prayer of a condemned woman. Before he could speak, before his inevitable, cutting dismissal could shatter my last sliver of hope, I closed the remaining distance between us. I heard Julian's enraged shout behind me. "Ilara, get back here now." The sound fueling the last of my courage. Without hesitation, I rose onto my toes, my ankles wobbling slightly in the impossibly high heels. I tangled my fingers in the impossibly smooth, cool lapels of his expensive suit and pressed my lips against his. For a split second, the world went utterly silent. His lips were hard, unyielding, tasting faintly of aged whiskey and absolute power. His body was rigid with shock, a statue of controlled force taken completely by surprise. The scent of him, clean, sharp, with notes of cedar and something metallic like ozone after a lightning strike, filled my senses. Then the world exploded. The first camera flash was a starburst in my peripheral vision. Then another and another, until the ballroom was filled with the frantic, staccato popping of flashbulbs like a volley of gunfire. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, a wave of shock and scandalized delight. I felt the shift in him. The initial rigidity gave way to something else. His hand came up, and for a terrifying moment I thought he would shove me away, leaving me to be devoured by the consequences. But he didn't. His hand landed on the small of my back, fingers splayed wide, a gesture of sudden, shocking possession that sent a tremor through my entire body. It was not a gesture of comfort. It was a claim. In that single, electrifying moment, he understood the game, and he had chosen to play. I broke the kiss, breathless, and found myself staring into his impossibly dark, unreadable eyes. There was no surprise left in them, only a cold, sharp, calculating intelligence. He understood the game instantly. He saw the board, the pieces, and the move I had just made, and in that split second, he had already decided how to play it to his advantage. The world came rushing back in a chaotic symphony of gasps and furiously clicking cameras. Julian finally reached us, his face a mask of purple rage, his perfectly styled hair disheveled. He was utterly frozen by the sheer audacity of the act, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The public humiliation was a poison, and he was choking on it. His fists were clenched at his sides, his knuckles white. The carefully constructed facade of the charming, powerful heir had crumbled, revealing the petulant, entitled brute beneath. "Ilara, what in God's name do you think you're doing?" he snarled, finally lunging forward to grab my arm. His fingers were like talons, digging into my flesh with bruising force. "This little game is over. You're coming with me right now." A jolt of pain shot up my arm, and I flinched, the familiar fear of his temper momentarily eclipsing the adrenaline. But before his grip could tighten, before he could drag me away like a misbehaving pet, the arm around my waist became a band of steel. Cashin didn't move, didn't even flinch, yet his presence was an impassable wall. He looked down at Julian's hand on my arm with an expression of profound boredom, as if observing a particularly uninteresting insect. "I believe the lady has made her preference clear," Cashin said. His voice was deceptively mild, a low, smooth baritone, yet it cut through the ballroom's murmur like shattering glass. Each word was delivered with an unnerving, almost lazy calm that was infinitely more menacing than any shout. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, a captive audience to a drama far more riveting than the planned merger announcement. Julian's face flushed a deeper shade of crimson. For the first time, he seemed to truly register the man he was confronting, not as a distant rival in a boardroom, but as a physical, immediate threat. The color drained slightly from his cheeks as his eyes darted from Cashin's unyielding grip on me to the silent, watchful way the entire room had fallen still. He saw the gleam of cold amusement in Cashin's eyes and realized he had walked into a trap of his own making. "She's my fiancé," Julian stammered, trying to regain his footing, his voice cracking with a desperate attempt at authority. "She's had too much champagne. She's not in her right mind. This is a private matter, Thorne. Stay out of it." A ghost of a smile touched Cashin's lips, a cold, sharp, predatory thing. "It became my matter the moment she chose my company over yours," he said, the double meaning hanging in the air, thick and potent. "As for her state of mind, she seems perfectly lucid to me. Perhaps she's simply come to her senses." He paused, letting the insult land with surgical precision, each word a carefully aimed dart. "Then again, choosing you in the first place would suggest a significant lapse in judgment. It's fortunate she found someone capable of looking after her." The public emasculation was complete. It left no visible mark but shattered Julian's confidence completely. He was drowning in a sea of silent judgment, and Cashin was calmly holding his head underwater. Cashin's eyes flickered for a fraction of a second, a glance over Julian's shoulder toward the ballroom's head of security, a broad, imposing man in a tuxedo who had been cautiously approaching. The man immediately understood the silent command. He never touched Julian, never made an overt threat, but he and another guard moved to flank the space, their bodies forming a subtle but impassable barrier. The message was absolute. "You are not welcome here. Your authority is gone." Julian backpedaled, his bravado evaporating under the weight of Cashin's silent, unassailable authority. He finally released my arm, leaving angry red marks on my skin that stood out starkly against my pale flesh. He cast one last venomous look at me, a look that promised retribution, that spoke of future pain and punishment in a language I understood all too well. Then he turned and retreated, swallowed by the crowd of whispering, phone-wielding onlookers. I watched in stunned silence, a dizzying wave of relief washing over me. I was amazed at how swiftly, how effortlessly, my tormentor had been dismantled and dismissed. He hadn't been defeated in a fight. He had simply been rendered irrelevant. I realized I was still pressed against Cashin Thorne, his arm a possessive brand around me. The scent of him, expensive cologne, whiskey, and something like cold, clean power, filled my senses. The camera flashes continued, a relentless assault, documenting every second of this new, scandalous reality. I should have been terrified, trapped in the orbit of a man even more dangerous than the one I'd fled. But for the first time all night, I could breathe. The air felt clean in my lungs. "We're leaving," he stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. It wasn't a question or a suggestion. It was a declaration of his will. He guided me through the parting sea of bodies, his hand firm and warm on the small of my back. The whispers followed us, like the rustling of dry leaves, a chorus of scandal and speculation. I caught a glimpse of my father's face. It was a mask of horror and disbelief. He looked older, smaller. He had lost his company and his daughter in the space of a single, catastrophic evening. I felt a pang of guilt, a deep, sorrowful ache, but it was quickly consumed by the overwhelming, intoxicating taste of freedom. A sleek, black car, a custom Rolls-Royce so dark it seemed to absorb the city lights, was waiting at the curb as if summoned. A driver in a crisp uniform, a man with the build of a professional fighter and a scar bisecting one eyebrow, held the rear door open. The interior was a world of supple black leather and profound silence. As the heavy door clicked shut, sealing us off from the clamoring paparazzi and the chaotic world outside, The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-rattling tremor. What had I done? Cashin remained silent for the first few minutes of the drive, his profile illuminated by the passing streetlights. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking straight ahead, his jaw tight, his expression an unreadable mask of stone. The silence was heavier than any words, thick with unspoken questions and cold, hard calculations. I sat perfectly still on the far side of the spacious seat, my hands clenched in my lap, the expensive fabric of my gown rustling with every tiny movement. I was acutely aware of the space between us, a chasm filled with danger and uncertainty. Finally, he spoke, his voice cool and devoid of any emotion. "Vance Publishing. Your father is CEO, on the verge of bankruptcy. The merger with Archer Media was his lifeline. You were the price." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. A cold, clinical summary of my life. He had already pieced it all together, probably in the first 10 seconds after the kiss. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. My entire, sordid little tragedy laid bare in 3 short sentences. "An act of desperation," he continued, still not looking at me. "Bold. Reckless. You've just detonated a war, Miss Vance, and you've placed yourself at its epicenter." His voice was flat, as if he were discussing a market fluctuation. "I had no choice," I whispered, finally finding my voice. It sounded small and reedy, a child's excuse even to my own ears. At that, he finally turned his head. His stormy eyes met mine in the dim light of the car. There was no sympathy in them, no warmth, only a cold, sharp, penetrating intelligence that seemed to see right through me, peeling back the layers of my desperation to expose the raw, calculating core of my actions. "There is always a choice," he said, his voice dropping lower, each word precise and cutting. "You could have run. You could have disappeared. Instead, you chose to walk into the fire. You chose to make yourself my problem. Now, the question is, what am I going to do with you?" The car glided into a private underground garage and stopped before a sleek, brushed steel elevator. He led me out, his hand once again on my back, a gesture that was no longer protective but purely proprietary. We ascended in silence, the elevator moving with a swift, silent efficiency that was slightly unnerving. It opened directly into a breathtaking penthouse apartment. The first thing that hit me was the view. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides revealed a panoramic, God's-eye view of the glittering city. The lights of a million lives spread out below us, like a carpet of fallen stars. The space was vast, minimalist, and decorated in shades of charcoal, black, and chrome. A single, enormous abstract painting, a violent slash of red on a black canvas, hung on one wall, the only spot of color in the entire room. It was as beautiful, imposing, and devoid of warmth as the man beside me. An older woman with silver hair pulled into a severe bun and an impeccably tailored black dress greeted us at the door. Her face was a mask of professional calm, but her eyes, sharp and intelligent, took in my disheveled state, the angry red marks on my arm, and the telltale absence of the diamond on my finger with a flicker of understanding. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice crisp and British. "Mrs. Davenport, prepare the guest suite," Cashin instructed, striding into the main living area as if I wasn't there. "Our guest will be staying for the foreseeable future." He walked to a floor-to-ceiling bar made of black marble and poured himself another whiskey. He didn't offer me one. I stood awkwardly in the center of the enormous room, feeling like a stray animal brought in from the rain, utterly out of place, unsure of where I was allowed to stand. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the clink of ice in his glass. He finally turned, leaning back against the bar, the glass held loosely in his hand. "You have 5 minutes to convince me not to send you back to them," he said, his eyes hard as flint. 5 minutes to prove that you are a more valuable asset to me than you are a liability." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The real negotiation. The kiss had been the opening bid. Now I had to close the deal. I took a deep breath, pushing down the fear, channeling the cold fury that had propelled me into his arms. Sending me back is a liability, I said, my voice shaking slightly but gaining strength with each word. It shows weakness. It makes your grand gesture in the ballroom look like a whim, a moment of arrogance you've since reconsidered. Julian gets what he wants, and you look like a man who can be challenged and then dismissed. Your enemies will see it. The market will see it. It undermines your reputation for ruthlessness. Cashin took a slow sip of his whiskey, his eyes never leaving my face. He didn't blink. He was listening, evaluating. Keep me, I continued, taking a step forward onto the plush gray rug. Keep me visible. Every day that I am on your arm, and not his, is a public humiliation for the Archer family. It's a constant, visible reminder that you took something they thought was theirs. It will distract them, make them angry. And angry men make mistakes in business. I was speaking his language now. Not the language of emotion or desperation, but of strategy, leverage, and assets. I know Vance Publishing. I pressed on, my mind racing, pulling together every scrap of information I had. I grew up in it. I know its assets, its weaknesses, the parts of it Julian truly wants for his media empire versus the parts he sees as dead weight. He wants its distribution network and its political nonfiction imprint. He doesn't care about the literary fiction or the poetry divisions. I can tell you exactly where to strike to devalue the very thing he's trying to acquire. I can make his victory so costly it feels like a defeat. A flicker of something, interest, perhaps a sliver of respect, entered his eyes. He slowly walked towards me, his movements fluid and silent, circling me like a shark assessing its prey. I held my breath, refusing to be intimidated, refusing to look away. You are offering yourself up as a weapon, he stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. I am offering you an advantage, I countered, standing my ground, lifting my chin. All I ask for in return is your protection. From Julian. From my own family, who will undoubtedly try to drag me back to salvage their deal. He stopped directly in front of me, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He was so much taller than I was, a towering, intimidating presence. He lifted a hand and, with one finger, tilted my chin up, forcing me to meet his intense, searching gaze. His touch was light, but it sent a jolt of electricity through me. Protection is not free, Miss Vance, he murmured, his voice a silken threat. My protection comes with terms. Strict terms. You will live here in this apartment. You will go where I say, when I say. You will wear the clothes I provide. You will play the part of the devoted, infatuated woman who left everything for me. In public, you will be untouchable, an extension of my power. In private, you will answer to me. You will trade one cage for another. The only difference is, I am a much more formidable zookeeper than Julian Archer. Tears pricked the back of my eyes, hot and sharp, but I refused to let them fall. I had come this far. I would not show weakness now. I understand, I whispered, my voice hoarse. Good. His gaze dropped to my left hand, which I had been unconsciously clenching at my side. With a deliberate, almost surgical precision, he reached out, his cool, strong fingers closing around mine. He gently unfurled my fist and, with his other hand, took hold of the monstrous diamond ring. He slid it off my finger. The sense of relief was so profound, so immediate, it made me dizzy. My finger felt impossibly light, bare for the first time in months. He held the ring up to the light for a moment, his expression contemptuous, as if it were a worthless trinket. Then his hand closed into a fist around it. He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, slid open a door leading to a vast, windswept balcony, and with a casual, dismissive flick of his wrist, tossed the 8-carat symbol of my bondage into the night. I didn't even hear it land. It was just gone, swallowed by the endless city below. He turned back to me, his face set like stone in the moonlight. The contract is sealed. Mrs. Davenport will show you to your room. We make our first public appearance tomorrow night at the Philharmonic Gala. Be ready. He then added as a final, chilling decree. From now on, you will call me Cashin." He dismissed me with a final, curt nod, turning back to the view as if I no longer existed. My purpose served for the evening. As I followed the silent, expressionless Mrs. Davenport down a long, sterile hallway of white marble and dark wood, the reality of my situation crashed down on me. I had escaped Julian. I had won the battle. But I had just willingly shackled myself to Cashin Thorne. I had run from the wolf and straight into the dragon's lair. And the dragon had just made it very clear that I was now part of his horde. The next morning, I woke to the unnatural silence of a space insulated from the world. My guest suite, as Cashin had called it, was a world unto itself. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking, vertigo-inducing view of Central Park, but the glass was so thick that not a whisper of the city's morning chaos could penetrate it. The bed was enormous, draped in linens so soft they felt like water against my skin. The silence, however, was the most profound luxury and the most unnerving. For the first time in months, I hadn't woken up with a knot of anxiety in my stomach, my ears straining for the sound of Julian's footsteps. But this new quiet was just as oppressive in its own way. It was the quiet of a museum, of a beautiful, sterile cage. I found Mrs. Davenport in the main living area, overseeing a silent, efficient cleaning crew. She greeted me with a polite nod, her expression as unreadable as ever. "Good morning, Miss Vance," she said, her crisp British accent echoing in the cavernous room. "Mr. Thorne has already left for the day. He instructed me to inform you that a tailor will be arriving at 10 a.m. to ensure your wardrobe is a perfect fit. The stylists for this evening's gala will arrive at 5. "My wardrobe?" I asked, confused. Mrs. Davenport simply gestured toward a set of double doors I hadn't noticed the night before. I opened them to find a walk-in closet the size of a small boutique. Racks of designer clothes, gowns, cocktail dresses, tailored trousers, silk blouses were arranged by color. Shelves displayed a breathtaking array of shoes, from towering stilettos to elegant flats. Handbags in every conceivable shape and shade of leather sat on illuminated glass shelves like museum pieces. A velvet-lined drawer contained a collection of exquisite jewelry, thankfully devoid of anything resembling an engagement ring. Everything was in my exact size. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the apartment's air conditioning. The discovery was unnerving, a silent testament to the terrifying efficiency of Cashin's information network. He hadn't just taken me in, he had researched me, quantified me, and equipped me for my new role with the cold precision of a quartermaster outfitting a soldier for a campaign. I was no longer Alara Vance. I was an asset, and I was being dressed for the part. The day passed in a surreal haze of fittings and consultations. The tailor, a tiny, severe-looking man, took my measurements with a series of disapproving clicks of his tongue, making minute adjustments to garments that already seemed perfect. I was a doll being dressed, an object being polished for display. I spent the afternoon exploring the vast, empty penthouse. It was less a home and more a corporate headquarters, filled with imposing modern art, sharp-angled furniture, and an unnerving lack of personal touches. There were no photographs, save for the one I would later discover in his library. No clutter, no sign that a human being with memories and attachments actually lived here. At precisely 5 o'clock, the stylists descended. For 2 hours, I was plucked, painted, and sculpted. My hair was swept into an intricate chignon at the nape of my neck. My makeup was dramatic and flawless, my eyes defined, my lips painted a deep, bold red. The midnight blue silk gown they chose clung to my curves, elegant and sensuous, but it felt like a costume. When I looked in the mirror, the woman staring back at me was a stranger, a beautiful, polished, formidable woman who looked like she belonged on the arm of a man like Cashin Thorne. She looked nothing like me. He returned just as they were finishing. He walked into the suite without knocking, his presence immediately filling the space, sucking all the air out of the room. He was already dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his dark hair still damp from a shower. He stopped in the doorway, his stormy eyes sweeping over me from head to toe in a slow, analytical appraisal. The stylists held their breath. Acceptable, he said finally, his voice a low murmur. He dismissed the stylist with a curt nod, and they scurried out of the room, leaving us alone. The silence that descended was thick with tension. "You look powerful," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. It was the only word that fit. A flicker of something, amusement, perhaps, danced in his eyes. "Power is the only currency that matters in this city, Alara," he replied, using my first name for the first time. It sounded strange in his mouth, formal and possessive. "Tonight, you are a demonstration of my power. Do not forget that." He held out his arm. "It's time to go." Walking into the Philharmonic Gala on Cashin's arm felt like stepping onto a battlefield. The air crackled with whispers and the barely concealed clicks of phone cameras. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, dissecting my dress, my expression, my proximity to the city's most feared man. Cashin was magnificent in his indifference. He moved through the crowd with an easy, predatory grace, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back, a silent, unyielding statement that I was with him. He nodded curtly to some, ignored others completely, his progress through the room a masterclass in calculated power dynamics. We inevitably ran into Julian and his father. Julian's face went white with a mixture of fury and humiliation when he saw me. He looked smaller, somehow, without the veneer of power he had projected at our engagement party. "Thorn," Marcus Archer said, his voice dripping with venom, his eyes cold and hard as river stones. "I see you've taken up an interest in my son's discarded property." Cashin's smile was glacial. "One man's trash, Archer, is another man's treasure," he replied, his voice a low, amused drawl. "You should have taught your son to hold on to his valuables more carefully." He then guided me away without another word, leaving the two men fuming in his wake. Later in the evening, as we stood near the bar, a portly man with a florid face approached us. "Cashin, good to see you," he boomed. "Heard you've been making waves with the Archer deal. This must be the lovely lady at the center of it all." Cashin's grip on my back tightened almost imperceptibly. "Thompson," he said, his voice cool. "This is Alara Vance." "Alara, this is Howard Thompson. He sits on the board of a bank Julian is trying to secure financing from." The message was clear. I was on stage. I extended my hand, forcing a warm, confident smile. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Thompson." "Charmed," Thompson said, his eyes appraising me. "Quite a bold move you made, young lady. The whole city is talking." "Sometimes, you have to make a bold move to get what you truly want," I replied, my voice smooth and steady. I let my gaze drift up to meet Cashin's, infusing it with as much adoration as I could fake. And I have no regrets. Cashin's expression remained unreadable, but I felt the pressure of his hand on my back relax slightly. It was the barest hint of approval, but it felt like a victory. I had played my part. I had demonstrated my value. The rest of the evening passed in a similar fashion. I was introduced to a dozen powerful people, and with each interaction, I felt my confidence growing. I was no longer the terrified girl in the hallway. I was the enigmatic woman on the arm of Cashin Thorn. I was a weapon, and I was beginning to understand how to wield myself. We left early. The moment the car door closed, the mask of polite indifference dropped from Cashin's face. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deeper than before. "You did well tonight," he said, the words startling me with their directness. It was the first compliment he had ever paid me. "I did as the contract requires," I replied, my voice cool, mirroring his own professional tone. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Indeed." The silence that followed was different from the one on the way to the gala. It was less tense, more contemplative. When we arrived back at the penthouse, he did something unexpected. "Come to the library," he said. It wasn't a request. He poured 2 glasses of brandy this time, handing one to me before sinking into a large leather armchair. The library was the only room in the apartment that felt lived in. The walls were lined with thousands of books, old and new, their spines a chaotic jumble of colors. He was quiet for a long time, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Howard Thompson will be voting against the Archer financing proposal at the next board meeting, he said finally, looking into the fire that Mrs. Davenport had lit. Your performance tonight convinced him that siding with the Archers is a losing bet. You cost Julian $10 million in potential credit lines with a single smile. I felt a surge of cold, satisfying power. Good, I said. He looked at me then, his gaze sharp and analytical. You enjoy this. I enjoy surviving, I corrected him. Julian tried to erase me. He tried to turn me into a silent asset. I'm just showing him how loud an asset can be. For the first time since I had met him, I saw a flicker of genuine, unfeigned emotion in his eyes. It was respect. He raised his glass in a silent toast. I raised mine in return. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 stories, a new, unspoken clause was added to our contract. We were not just a man and his weapon. We were allies. Later that week, I found the photograph. I couldn't sleep and had wandered into the library, drawn by the lingering scent of old paper and whiskey. The fire was out, the room cast in the soft glow of the city lights. On his massive desk, propped up against a stack of books, was the small, silver-framed picture. I picked it up. It was of a much younger Cashin, perhaps a teenager, standing beside a woman with his same stormy eyes and a tired, gentle smile. She had her arm around him, a look of fierce, protective love on her face. It was a world away from the cold, ruthless man I knew. The sound of footsteps made me jump. He was standing in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the hallway light. I froze, the photograph feeling like a stolen secret in my hand. I expected him to be angry, to demand what I was doing in his private space. Instead, he just stood there, his expression unreadable in the shadows. My mother, he said, his voice quiet, devoid of its usual hard edge. She died a few years after that was taken. The Archers ruined my father, and the stress it took its toll on her. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and unexpected. It was a glimpse into the furnace that had forged the man, the source of his cold, relentless fury. I carefully placed the photograph back on the desk. I'm sorry, I whispered. He just nodded, his gaze distant. She believed in fighting for what was yours, he said, more to himself than to me. She would have liked you. He turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the quiet of the library. I stood there for a long time, the weight of his unexpected confidence settling over me. The cage was still a cage, gilded and luxurious, but a cage nonetheless. But that night, for the first time, I realized that my formidable zookeeper might be just as trapped inside it as I was. My feelings for him, once a simple cocktail of fear and strategic necessity, were beginning to curse into something far more complex and dangerous. The fragile alliance forged in the library altered the atmosphere of the penthouse. The silence between us was no longer a void of tension, but a space of contemplation. Our infrequent dinners became a near-nightly ritual, evolving from terse, strategic briefings into something more. We would sit across from each other at the massive dining table, the city lights twinkling below, and the conversation would shift from the Archers to the market, from the market to politics, from politics to philosophy. I discovered he was formidably well-read, his mind a steel trap that could dissect an argument with ruthless precision. He, in turn, seemed intrigued by my perspective, by the insights I offered that came not from a place of cold logic, but from a lifetime spent observing the nuances of human ambition and folly within my father's literary world. Our public appearances continued, each one a carefully orchestrated move in our silent war against the Archers. We were a formidable team. His power and my insider knowledge were proving to be a devastating combination. The Archer-Vance merger, once a foregone conclusion, was now bleeding capital, mired in regulatory delays and shareholder revolts that seemed to spring up out of nowhere. Julian was becoming a laughingstock in the financial community, the boyar who couldn't close a deal, who had let his prize slip through his fingers and into the hands of his greatest enemy. His public humiliation was my private, bitter victory. But Julian wasn't just weak. He was vindictive, a spoiled child denied his favorite toy. When his direct attempts to regain control failed, he changed his strategy. He stopped attacking Cashin and started coming after the one thing I couldn't defend: my family. The first blow came in the form of a newspaper article, a calculated leak to a tabloid owned by a subsidiary of Archer Media. The headline was salacious: Bankrupt Vance sells daughter T.O. saves sinking ship. The article painted a humiliating picture of my father as a desperate, incompetent businessman who had pimped out his own child, and portrayed me as a conniving, social-climbing courtesan who had callously abandoned her family for a richer protector. It was cruel, it was largely untrue, but it was effective. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, suffocating blanket. "Ignore it," Cashin said coolly when he saw me staring at the article on my tablet, my hands trembling. "It's the predictable move of a desperate man. It has no real impact." But it did have an impact. The next day, my father called. It was the first time I had heard his voice since the night of the engagement party. "Alara?" His voice was strained, heavy with an exhaustion that went beyond weariness. It was the sound of defeat.
"Dad,"
I whispered, my own voice thick with a confusing mix of anger and pity.
I
saw the papers," he began, his voice cracking. "Your mother is devastated. She won't leave her room." He paused, and I could hear him take a ragged breath. "Alara, you don't understand what you're doing. He's not just stalling the merger anymore. He's actively dismantling us from the inside. He's buying up our debt from secondary lenders. He's threatening to call in all our loans at once. He'll force us into a hostile bankruptcy just out of spite. We'll lose everything: the house, our name, the company your grandfather started." His voice broke completely, and the sound of his quiet, desperate sobs was a knife in my gut. This was Julian's true weapon, not his power, but my guilt. "Please, Laurie," he begged, using my childhood nickname, a deliberate, cruel twist of the knife. "Just talk to him. Apologize. Whatever it takes. Come home. We can fix this. It's not too late." The weight of his words was crushing. The guilt was a physical thing, a heavy stone in my chest. He was asking me to walk back into my cage, to sacrifice myself on the altar of his legacy again. The old Alara, the dutiful daughter, would have agreed. But I was no longer that person. "I can't, Dad," I said, my voice cold and hard, a pale imitation of Cashin's. "You made your deal. I've made mine." I ended the call, my hand shaking so badly I dropped the phone onto the plush rug. The tears I had refused to shed finally came, hot and furious. They were tears of rage, of grief, of a profound and soul-crushing loneliness. I relayed the threat to Cashin that evening. I delivered the information with a cool, detached professionalism, refusing to let him see the emotional turmoil raging inside me. He listened without expression, his face an unreadable mask, his stormy eyes fixed on my face. "He's escalating," Cashin stated, swirling the brandy in his glass. "Forcing a hostile bankruptcy is a scorched earth tactic. It would hurt him as much as it would hurt your father." "Julian doesn't care about the money anymore," I said, my voice hollow. "This is personal. He wants to punish me. He wants to prove he can still control me, even from a distance." "He is testing my commitment to protecting my assets," Cashin mused, his gaze distant. "He believes that my interest in you is purely strategic and that I will cut my losses when the liability becomes too high." The cold, transactional language stung, a sharp reminder of the foundation of our relationship, despite the fragile intimacy that had begun to grow between us. I was still an asset, a valuable one, perhaps, but an asset nonetheless. The realization brought a sudden, chilling clarity. Our current strategy was failing. We were playing defense, reacting to Julian's moves. But Julian wasn't playing chess, he was setting fires. And if we kept reacting, he would eventually burn everything down around us, including the very company that was the foundation of our leverage against him. I stood up, my fists clenched at my sides. The passive, reactive phase of my new life was over. "Our strategy is wrong," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound conviction that startled even myself. Cashin looked up, one eyebrow raised in silent question. We're waiting for him to make mistakes. But we can't afford to wait any longer. He's willing to destroy the prize just to make sure we can't have it. We can't just defend against his attacks. We have to go on the offensive. We have to stop dismantling his deal and start dismantling his entire company. The silence in the room was absolute. I had crossed a line. I was no longer just providing information. I was dictating strategy. I was no longer the protected, but the partner. Cashin stared at me for a long, unblinking moment. His expression was intense, searching. He was reevaluating me, seeing me not as the desperate girl who had kissed him at a party, but as the woman standing before him, a woman forged in the fire of his world, a woman who was now proposing to burn his enemy to the ground. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. It was the first genuine, unrestrained smile I had ever seen from him. It was terrifying and exhilarating. The aftermath of that decision was a palpable shift in the penthouse's atmosphere. The invisible line between his world and my designated space dissolved. The next morning, I didn't wait for an invitation. I walked into his home office, a sleek, glass-walled room that overlooked the city, and found him already at his desk, a vast expanse of polished obsidian. He looked up as I entered, and there was no surprise in his eyes, only a quiet expectation. "Good morning," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. It was the first time I had ever sat at that desk as anything other than a petitioner. "I've had my team clear my schedule for the day. The board is yours, Alara." For the next 10 hours, the office became our war room. We didn't just talk, we dissected. Fueled by black coffee and a shared, cold fury, I poured out everything I knew. I drew diagrams of the corporate structure of Vance Publishing, highlighting the overlooked assets and the hidden liabilities. I detailed the personalities and weaknesses of every key board member, my father included. I explained the intricate, often archaic, network of personal loyalties and quiet feuds that governed the old-world publishing house. It was knowledge I had absorbed over a lifetime, details Julian, in his arrogance, had never bothered to learn. Cashin listened with an unnerving, focused intensity. He didn't interrupt. He absorbed every piece of information, his sharp mind connecting dots I hadn't even seen. He would occasionally ask a terse, incisive question that cut to the heart of the matter, forcing me to clarify, to dig deeper. It wasn't an interrogation. It was a collaboration. He wasn't just using my knowledge. He was sharpening it. "The poetry division," he said, pointing to a small, seemingly insignificant part of my diagram. "You said Julian considers a dead weight. What's its real value?" "It loses money," I admitted. "But its backlist contains the publishing rights to 2 Nobel laureates and 3 Pulitzer Prize winners. Its cultural cachet is immense. It's the one thing my father is truly proud of. If Julian were to gut it, it would be a personal attack my father couldn't ignore. It would shatter their alliance." A slow, predatory smile touched Cashin's lips. "So, we don't attack the structure," he mused, his fingers steepling. "We attack the soul." That single exchange set the tone for the days that followed. My role transformed. I was no longer a passive informant. I was an active strategist. I was given encrypted access to his company's servers, a seat in his virtual meetings with his legal and financial teams. At first, they were skeptical. I could see it in the wary, dismissive glances of his top executives, a formidable group of men and women who had earned their place through sheer ruthlessness. I was the billionaire's new, pretty distraction, a flighty girl playing at business. The turning point came during a video conference with his head of mergers and acquisitions, a sharp, intimidating woman named Diana. They were discussing a plan to acquire a block of Vance Publishing's debt, the very debt Julian was using to threaten my father. "The price is too high," Diana argued, her voice crisp. "We'd be overpaying for a distressed asset." "You're looking at it as a financial instrument," I interjected, my voice startling everyone, including myself. "You need to look at it as a psychological one. The creditor is an old family friend of the Vances. He's being bullied by the archers. He's terrified. If we approach him not with a lowball offer, but with a premium and frame it as a rescue, he'll not only sell, he'll become a source. He'll tell us everything he knows about the archers' pressure tactics. The silence on the line was deafening. I could feel Cashin's eyes on me. Do it, he said finally, his voice calm, decisive. Pay the premium. And Diana, he added, from now on, Miss Vance is to be included in all strategic planning concerning this operation. Her insights are valuable. The respect I saw in Diana's eyes after that was hard-won, and more satisfying than any designer gown he had ever bought for me. Our lives fell into a new, intense rhythm. We worked side by side, often late into the night. The vast, cold penthouse began to feel smaller, the space between us charged with a new kind of energy. The professional and the personal began to bleed into one another in ways that were both exhilarating and terrifying. One night, after a grueling 12-hour session analyzing financial reports, I was slumped over the desk, my eyes burning with exhaustion. I must have drifted off. I woke with a start to the feeling of something warm and soft being draped over my shoulders. It was Cashin's suit jacket. He was standing behind me, his presence a silent, solid wall. The jacket smelled of him, that clean, sharp scent of cedar and power. You need to rest, he said, his voice a low murmur near my ear. We're not finished, I argued, my own voice thick with sleep. We are for tonight, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. His hands rested on my shoulders for a moment, a brief, startlingly gentle touch. Go to bed, Alara. The gesture was small, almost insignificant, but it was a crack in the facade, a glimpse of the man beneath the monster. I retreated to my room that night feeling a confusing warmth spread through my chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with his jacket. The pretense of our public relationship also deepened. Before, it had been a performance, a series of staged gestures. Now it felt easier, more natural. At a charity benefit, we found ourselves cornered by a particularly nosy journalist. Mr. Thorne, you and Miss Vance seem to spend all your time together, she said, her smile sharp. Is it all business, or is there any time for pleasure? Before I could formulate a polite, evasive answer, Cashin's arm slid around my waist, pulling me snugly against his side. When you find a partner as brilliant as Alara, he said, his voice smooth as silk as he looked down at me, his eyes filled with a convincing, molten heat, business is a pleasure. My breath hitched. The line between the performance and reality was blurring, and the feeling was dangerously addictive. Later that evening, on the dance floor, he pulled me close, our bodies moving together in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. You're a natural actress, he murmured, his lips close to my ear. I had a good teacher in pretense, I replied, my voice a little unsteady. My engagement to Julian. His expression darkened, the easy charm vanishing. Don't compare me to him, he said, his voice hard. Ever. The intensity of his reaction startled me. It was more than just pride. It was a deep, visceral rejection of the comparison. It was the first time I realized that his actions, his protection, might be driven by something more than just strategic advantage. The final wall between us came down during a simulated negotiation. His legal team was preparing for a potential proxy battle for the Vance board, and I was playing the role of my own father. Cashin was playing the opposition. We were in the penthouse's large, formal dining room, the table littered with files. He was relentless, dissecting my arguments, exploiting every emotional weakness, using my loyalty to my father's legacy against me. He was playing to win. I parried his attacks, using my intimate knowledge of my father's character to counter his moves. The argument became heated, the professional simulation bleeding into a genuine clash of wills. You're sentimental, he accused, his voice rising. You're letting your attachment to a failing legacy blind you to the only logical move. And you're a cynic, I shot back, standing up, my palms flat on the table. You see everything as a transaction, a number on a spreadsheet. You don't understand that things like loyalty, like history, have value beyond a price tag. Loyalty is a weakness, he thundered, standing to face me. History is a cage. I have built my entire empire on the foundation of those two facts. We were standing inches apart, both breathing heavily, the air crackling with the raw energy of our confrontation. His stormy eyes were blazing, and in them, I saw not just anger, but a deep, aching pain. In that moment, I wasn't his asset, and he wasn't my protector. We were just two people, stripped bare by the intensity of our battle. The anger in his eyes slowly subsided, replaced by something else, something hotter and more dangerous. His gaze dropped to my lips. My heart began to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The world seemed to narrow to the space between us. "You are formidable, Alara Vance," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper. He leaned in, and I thought he was going to kiss me. I wanted him to. I leaned in to meet him, my eyes fluttering shut. But he stopped, his lips hovering a breath away from mine. I could feel the heat of him, smell the whiskey on his breath. The moment stretched, taut and agonizing. Then, with a curse under his breath, he straightened up, turning away from me and running a hand through his hair. "The simulation is over," he said, his voice strained. "You've won." He walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, my body trembling with a mixture of disappointment and a terrifying, exhilarating hope. The professional contract was still in place, but a new, unspoken one had just been signed. The lines had not just blurred, they had been completely erased. And we were both standing in the wreckage, unsure of what came next. He looked at me differently now, his eyes lingering when he thought I wasn't watching. And in his gaze, for the first time, I saw not just the appreciation for an asset, but the undisguised desire for a woman. The weeks leading up to the Vance Publishing annual shareholder meeting were a blur of intense, focused activity. The penthouse, once a silent, sterile monument to power, was transformed into the nerve center of a corporate coup. Lawyers, analysts, and public relations experts came and went in a quiet, efficient stream, their faces grim and determined. Our strategy was no longer about defense or attrition, it was about annihilation. We weren't just trying to block the Archer merger. We were planning to shatter the Archer family's control over their own empire. Through the debt we had acquired and a series of shrewd, aggressive stock purchases on the open market, Cashin had secured a significant minority stake in Vance Publishing. It wasn't enough to control the company, but it was enough to force a vote, to challenge the board's authority, and to give me a platform. I was no longer a pawn to be traded. I was a shareholder with a voice. The night before the meeting, the calm before the storm, Cashin found me standing on the balcony, staring down at the city lights. The wind was cool, whipping strands of my hair across my face. For all the work, for all the planning, a knot of cold fear was tightening in my stomach. Tomorrow, I would face my father, my family's legacy, and the man who had almost destroyed me, all in one room. Second thoughts. His voice came from the doorway, a low rumble in the quiet of the night. I shook my head, not turning to look at him.
No.
Just bracing for impact. He walked to stand beside me, his presence a solid, reassuring warmth in the cool air. We stood in silence for a long moment, watching the endless river of headlights below. "When I was 17, he said, his voice quiet, contemplative, "Marcus Archer destroyed my father. He didn't just outmaneuver him in business. He ruined him personally, using the media to spread lies until my father was a pariah. My mother got sick. We lost everything. I stood at a bus stop, watching the movers take the last of our furniture, and I swore that one day I would take everything from him." He turned to look at me, his eyes dark and intense in the moonlight. "Tomorrow is not just about your freedom, Alara. It's the culmination of a 20-year war. I am placing the final, killing blow in your hands. Are you ready?" I finally met his gaze, and in his eyes, I saw the ghost of the boy at the bus stop, a boy filled with a cold, righteous fury. And I understood. This was never just about business.
It was about justice.
It was about vengeance. "I'm ready," I said, and my voice was steady, clear, and cold as ice. The shareholder meeting was held in a soulless, wood-paneled conference room at a downtown hotel. The air was thick with tension, a mixture of corporate greed, old money entitlement, and barely concealed panic. I walked in with caution, and a hush fell over the room. We were the barbarians at the gate. My father was sitting at the head of the long table, looking pale and gaunt. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Julian was beside him, his face a mask of smug confidence, but the nervous tick in his jaw betrayed his anxiety. He looked at me, a flicker of the old, possessive anger in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a dismissive sneer. To him, I was still just a sideshow, a woman scorned, not a credible threat. It was the last mistake he would ever make. The meeting began with a series of dry, procedural formalities. Then, Marcus Archer, patched in via a large video screen, gave a confident presentation about the benefits of the merger, painting a rosy picture of growth and synergy. It was a masterful performance, full of corporate jargon and empty promises. Then, it was Cashin's turn to speak. He didn't rise. He simply leaned forward, his presence commanding the room's absolute attention. He didn't talk about synergy.
He talked about debt.
He calmly, methodically, laid out the perilous financial state of Archer Media, revealing a series of risky, over-leveraged ventures that the market didn't yet know about. His voice was a surgical instrument, cutting through the Archers' carefully constructed facade of invincibility. Panic began to ripple through the faces of the Vance board members. "The Archers are not offering you a lifeline," Cashin concluded, his eyes locking onto my father's. "They are offering you a place on their sinking ship." Then he looked at me and nodded. It was my turn. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but when I stood up, my legs were steady. I walked to the podium at the front of the room, my heels clicking with deliberate purpose on the polished floor. I didn't look at my notes. I looked directly at Julian. "Good morning," I began, my voice clear and amplified by the microphone. "My name is Alara Vance, and for the past year, this board has been asked to consider a merger that was predicated on a lie. The lie was that this deal was about the future of Vance Publishing.
But it was never about that.
It was a transaction, a private sale in which the primary asset was not a company, but a daughter." A wave of shocked murmurs swept the room. My father's face was ashen. "I am a holder of the Vance Family Trust shares," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "And I am here today to speak not as a scorned fiancé, but as a shareholder whose primary interest is the long-term health of this company. A health that has been jeopardized by the reckless and, as it turns out, fraudulent behavior of our proposed partner, Julian Archer." Julian shot to his feet. "This is an outrage. She has no right to make these baseless accusations." "Then perhaps you can explain these?" I said, and with a click of the remote in my hand, the large screen behind me, which had moments before shown Marcus Archer's confident face, now displayed a series of bank statements and encrypted emails. "This is a detailed record of a shell corporation registered offshore," I explained, my voice cold and precise as I walked the board through the evidence. "A corporation that Mr. Archer used to divert funds from the initial merger deposit. Funds that were not reinvested, but were used to cover significant personal gambling debts." The room erupted. Julian's face went from red to a pasty, sickly white. He stared at the screen, his mouth agape. "The evidence is all there," I said, my gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the board members.
Fraud.
Embezzlement. A clear breach of fiduciary duty. Is this the man you want to entrust with the future of this company? A man who would steal from his own deal before the ink was even dry. I turned my back on Julian and faced the board, faced my father. "I am therefore tabling a motion. A vote of no confidence in the current merger agreement with Archer Media. And I am proposing an alternative, a restructuring plan, financed by Mr. Thorne, that will keep Vance Publishing independent, solvent, and free from the corruption that has plagued this deal from the start." The chaos that followed was absolute. Shouts, accusations, frantic phone calls. In the middle of it all, Julian stood, utterly broken, exposed and humiliated in front of the world he had tried so hard to dominate. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. The vote was a landslide. The Archer merger was dead. As the board members scrambled to either distance themselves from the Archers or align with the new power structure, I walked back to my seat. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving a strange, quiet calm in its wake. The war was over. Julian was escorted from the room by security, not because he was a threat, but because he was a liability. He was finished. As he passed, his eyes met mine one last time. They were empty. There was no anger, no hatred. Just the hollowed-out look of a man who had lost everything. I felt nothing. No pity, no triumph. Just closure. When the room had finally cleared, only Cashin, my father, and I remained. My father looked at me, his eyes filled with a complicated mixture of shame, pride, and awe. "Ilara," he started, his voice thick. I'm so sorry." I just nodded. There would be time for forgiveness later. Or maybe there wouldn't. But for now, it was enough. Cashin came to stand beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder. He looked at my father. "The restructuring will begin on Monday," he said, his voice all business. "Your daughter will have a seat on the new board. I trust that won't be a problem." My father could only shake his head, speechless. As we walked out of the conference room and into the bright light of the hallway, leaving my father to grapple with the wreckage and rebirth of his company, I felt a profound sense of lightness. The chains were well and truly broken. In the elevator, Cashin was silent. He just watched me, his expression unreadable. When we were back in the car, I finally let out a long, shaky breath I felt like I had been holding for a year. "It's over," I whispered, more to myself than to him. He reached across the space between us and took my hand. His grip was warm and steady. "No," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "It's just beginning." When we returned to the penthouse, the place felt different. Lighter. The oppressive silence was gone. I walked into the library, the room where our alliance had been forged, and stood by the window, looking out at the city. It was the same view, but I was seeing it with new eyes. Cashin came to stand beside me. "You were magnificent today," he said quietly. "I had a good teacher," I replied, turning to face him. "No," he said, his gaze intense. "That was all you. I just opened the door. You were the one who had the courage to walk through it." The space between us crackled with unspoken emotions, with a year of shared battles, of late-night strategies, of slowly dawning respect and a dangerous, undeniable attraction. The external threat was gone. The contract was fulfilled. And now, there was nothing left but the two of us and the terrifying, exhilarating question of what came next. In the days following the shareholder meeting, a strange and unfamiliar quiet settled over the penthouse. The war was over. The constant influx of lawyers and analysts ceased. The late-night strategy sessions, the shared adrenaline, the very purpose that had defined our cohabitation had evaporated. What remained was a hollow, echoing silence filled with unspoken questions. Our victory had been absolute. The financial world was in an uproar. News of Julian's fraud and the spectacular collapse of the Archer-Vance merger was on the front page of every major newspaper. He was facing federal indictment, and Archer Media was in a death spiral of shareholder lawsuits and plummeting stock prices. Cashin had won his 20-year war. I had won my freedom. The contract was, for all intents and purposes, fulfilled. And I had never felt more lost. We existed in a state of polite, awkward limbo. We ate our meals in near silence, the easy camaraderie of the war room replaced by the stilted formality of two strangers who knew too much about each other. The pretense of our public relationship was no longer necessary, and without that script to follow, we were both adrift. He would retreat to his office for hours, and I would wander the vast, empty apartment, feeling like a ghost haunting the scene of a former life. The guest suite, which had once felt like a luxurious prison, now felt like a temporary holding cell. All the beautiful clothes in the closet, the tools of my trade as his asset, now seemed like a costume from a play that had ended its run. They weren't mine. Nothing here was mine. I was living on borrowed time, in a borrowed life. The logical, inevitable conclusion was that I had to leave. It was the only move left to make. The thought was a cold, hard stone in my stomach. Leaving the security of this place, leaving the intoxicating orbit of the man who had become the center of my world, was terrifying. But staying, with no purpose, no contract to define my presence, was untenable. I spent a day making quiet preparations. I used the credit card Cashin had provided, an instrument of my gilded cage that could now become a tool for my independence, to book a simple, long-stay hotel suite in a quiet part of the city. I packed a single suitcase, leaving behind the entire designer wardrobe. I took only a few of the simpler, more practical outfits and the things I had arrived with, which felt like a lifetime ago. The only thing of value I took was a first edition of a classic novel I had found in his library, a book we had once argued passionately about. It felt like a small, stolen piece of our shared history. That evening, I knew I had to tell him. I found him in the library, the room where our alliance had been forged, where he had shown me the first glimpse of the man behind the monster. He was standing by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring into the flames. "Cashin," I said softly from the doorway. He turned, his expression unreadable, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Weariness, perhaps even sadness. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "The war is over," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "Julian is no longer a threat. The contract is fulfilled. I've made arrangements to leave in the morning." The silence that followed was absolute. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stared at me, his stormy eyes searching my face, as if trying to decipher a complex code. The seconds stretched into an agonizing eternity. I had expected a curt nod, a professional handshake, perhaps even a generous severance package. I had not expected this profound, unnerving stillness. "Leave," he said finally, the word a low, rough whisper. "To go where?" "I've found a place," I said vaguely. "I need to start my own life. Rebuild. My father has offered me a position on the new board of Vance Publishing. I have a purpose now." "Your purpose is here," he stated, his voice flat, but with an undercurrent of something fierce, something barely restrained. I gave a small, sad laugh. "My purpose here is finished, Cashin. I was your weapon. The weapon is no longer needed." In 2 long strides, he crossed the room to stand in front of me. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from him, see the flames of the fire reflected in his dark eyes. "Is that all you think you were to me?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "A weapon. It was the contract we agreed upon," I whispered, my resolve beginning to crumble under the intensity of his gaze. "To hell with the contract," he bit out, his control finally snapping. "Was that a contract when I stayed with you in the kitchen after your nightmare? Was it a contract when I told you about my mother? Was it a contract when I put my entire 20-year plan for revenge in your hands?" His voice was raw with an emotion I had never heard from him before. It was anger, yes, but beneath it was something else, something that sounded like hurt. I don't know what you want from me, Cashin," I stammered, overwhelmed. "I want you to stop hiding behind the damned contract and admit what this has become," he said, his hands coming up to grip my shoulders. His touch was firm, desperate, not controlling. "This stopped being about Julian, about the Archers, about revenge a long time ago. I know it, and so do you." He was right. The lie I had been telling myself, that this was all a strategic alliance, that the feelings I had for him were just a complicated form of gratitude or Stockholm Syndrome, shattered into a million pieces.
Why?
I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. "Why did you never say anything?" His expression softened, the anger draining away, leaving behind a raw vulnerability that was more shocking than any display of power. He let out a long, ragged breath, his forehead resting against mine. "Because you came to me for sanctuary," he said, his voice rough with emotion. You were running from a man who tried to own you, to control you. How could I then turn around and lay my own claim on you? I had to wait. I had to wait until you were truly free, until the threat was gone, until you had your own power, your own choices. So that if you chose, you would be choosing me, not your protector, not your zookeeper.
Me.
He pulled back slightly, his hands moving to frame my face, his thumbs gently stroking my cheeks. He told me then about his life, about the cold, empty years spent building his empire, fueled by nothing but vengeance. He spoke of the isolation, of the profound loneliness of being at the top, of never being able to trust anyone. From the moment you kissed me at that party, he confessed, his stormy eyes searching mine, you were a disruption, a beautiful, chaotic variable in my perfectly controlled world. At first, I thought you were just a tool, the perfect instrument for my revenge. But you were so much more. You were brave and brilliant, and you challenged me. You saw the man behind the monster, and you weren't afraid. You became the only part of my life that felt real. He let out a dry, humorless laugh. I brought you here to be my weapon, and somewhere along the way, you became my reason. My light in the dark. I don't want you to leave, Ilara. I don't think I can function in the dark anymore. The confession stole the air from my lungs. This powerful, untouchable man, this corporate titan who brought markets to their knees with a single word, was laying his heart, his wounds, his loneliness, bare before me. The tears I had been holding back finally fell, tracing hot paths down my cheeks. I don't want to leave, I admitted, my voice choked with tears. I was leaving because I thought I had to, because I didn't know. Know what? He urged gently. That I could be anything more to you than an asset, I whispered. And because I was terrified of what I felt for you. And what do you feel for me, Ilara? He asked, his gaze unwavering. I love you, I said, the words a quiet, simple truth that settled over us, profound and irreversible. I fell in love with the man who taught me how to fight, who showed me my own strength, who looked at me and saw not a pretty asset, but an equal. A slow, beautiful smile spread across his face, a smile of such profound relief and joy that it transformed his harsh features, making him look younger, freer. Then stay, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Stay and be my equal in all things. He leaned in and captured my lips in a kiss that was nothing like the desperate, calculated one I had given him at the party. This kiss was deep and slow and searingly honest. It was a kiss of confession, of surrender, of a shared and profound homecoming. It was the breaking of the old contract and the sealing of a new one written not on paper, but on the soul. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. The pretense was gone. The war was over. The games were finished. All that was left was the raw, terrifying, beautiful truth of what we had become to each other. I love you, Ilara Vance, he murmured against my lips. And I have no intention of ever letting you go. He swept me up into his arms, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a possession being carried, but like a treasure being cherished. He carried me from the library, the room of our alliance, and down the long hallway, past my guest suite, past the gilded cage, and into his own private domain, the master bedroom I had never entered. And as the door closed behind us, I knew, with an unshakable certainty, that I was finally, truly home. The months that followed were a revelation. Waking up in Cashin's arms became my new reality, a reality more grounding and secure than any I had ever known. The vast, minimalist penthouse, once a symbol of his cold isolation, slowly began to transform. It started with small things. A vase of my favorite flowers, peonies, not lilies, appeared on the console table. My books began to colonize the shelves in the library, their colorful, worn spines a cheerful rebellion against his rows of austere leather-bound classics. The silence was no longer empty, it was filled with the easy cadence of our conversations, with music, with the sound of his rare, genuine laughter, a sound I discovered I was ruthlessly dedicated to provoking. Our relationship, forged in the crucible of corporate warfare, settled into a rhythm of profound partnership. I took the seat on the new board of a revitalized, independent Vance Publishing. My father and I began a slow, careful process of reconciliation. He was a changed man, humbled by his near ruin and deeply proud of the daughter who had saved his legacy not by sacrificing herself, but by asserting her own power. He saw me differently now, not as a child to be protected or a pawn to be traded, but with a newfound, profound respect. Cashin was my staunchest supporter. He never interfered, never offered unsolicited advice, but he was my silent partner, my greatest champion. He would listen for hours as I talked through my plans to modernize the publishing house, his sharp mind helping me refine my strategies, challenging my assumptions, and celebrating my victories. He wasn't just my lover. He was my mentor, my confidant, and my best friend. Our public persona also shifted. We were no longer a scandalous headline, the billionaire and his beautiful weapon. We were a power couple, a formidable, united front. The whispers that had once followed us were replaced by a palpable sense of awe and respect. We were a team, and the world knew it. Yet a small, persistent insecurity lingered in a quiet corner of my heart. Everything I had, my position, my newfound security, was inextricably linked to him. I had escaped one form of dependency only to find myself in another, albeit a far more loving one. I was no longer a possession, but was I truly independent? I knew I needed to build something that was entirely my own, a testament to my own strength and vision, separate from both the Vance legacy and the Thorne empire. I found my opportunity in the small, undervalued tech subsidiary of Vance Publishing, the one whose potential I had first pointed out to Cashin. It was the part of my father's company I had always loved, the place where logic and creativity intersected. With Cashin's quiet encouragement and a business loan secured on my own merits, not his name, I began the process of spinning it off into its own independent company. I named it Phoenix Press, a nod to its rise from the ashes of the old world. The work was all-consuming, a thrilling, terrifying challenge. I poured all my energy into it, building a team, securing funding, and developing the data compression algorithm that had been languishing in obscurity. For the first time, I wasn't just fighting against something, I was building something. Cashin watched from a respectful distance, a proud, supportive observer. He never once offered to simply write a check, never tried to absorb my fledgling company into his own vast empire. He understood, without me ever having to say it, that this was something I needed to do for myself. This was my declaration of independence. A year after the engagement party that had changed my life, we attended the annual Met Gala. It was the pinnacle of the city's social calendar, a world away from the tense, hostile battlefields where our relationship had been forged. I wore a gown of my own choosing, a stunning creation by a young, up-and-coming designer whose work I admired. It was elegant, powerful, and unapologetically my own style. As we stood at the top of the grand staircase, mobbed by photographers, I felt Cashin's hand tighten in mine. He leaned in, his lips close to my ear. "You see that man over there?" he murmured, his voice a low thrum against my skin. "The one talking to the senator? That's the head of the largest venture capital fund on the West Coast. He spent all afternoon trying to get a meeting with the brilliant new CEO of Phoenix Press. He had no idea she was my date." The pride in his voice was a warm, intoxicating wave, washing away the last of my insecurities. I looked up at him, my heart swelling with a love so fierce it almost hurt. "And what did you tell him?" I asked, a playful smile on my lips. His eyes glinted with amusement. "I told him her schedule was very full," he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand, "but that I might be able to put in a good word for him." We both laughed, a shared, intimate moment in the midst of the glittering chaos. It was in that moment that a society columnist, a notoriously sharp-tongued woman named Beatrice Blackwood, either brave or foolish, cornered us. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice sharp as broken glass, her microphone held up like a weapon. "It's been quite a year for you both. Everyone says that Alara Vance is your greatest acquisition. Would you agree? The question hung in the air, a relic of our past, a test of our present. The old whispers, the old labels, asset, property, trophy, threatened to resurface. I felt Cashin tense beside me, a protective anger radiating from him. But before he could deliver a withering, cutting reply, I squeezed his hand, a silent signal. Let me handle this. I turned to the columnist, my smile calm and serene. Beatrice, I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying over the nearby chatter. An acquisition is something you buy. A partnership is something you build. What Cashin and I have, we built together through a great deal of fire and negotiation. I paused, letting my gaze drift up to meet Cashin's, my eyes filled with a genuine, unassailable love. And I can assure you, the terms of our final merger are more than favorable to both parties. A slow, genuine smile spread across Cashin's face, a smile of such profound love and pride that it transformed his harsh features. He leaned down and kissed me, a soft, lingering kiss that was both a seal on my words and a declaration to the entire world. The camera flashes erupted, but this time, they weren't capturing a scandal. They were capturing a coronation. Later that night, we returned not to the penthouse, but to a new home we had chosen together, a beautiful, historic brownstone with a garden, a place filled with warmth, with books, with life. It was our neutral ground, the foundation of our shared future. As we stood in the quiet of our new library, he handed me a heavy, leather-bound folder. Inside, it wasn't a contract. It was a single, elegantly printed document. What is this? I asked, my heart beginning to pound. Read it, he said, his voice soft. It was a legal document, establishing a charitable foundation. The Alara Vance and Cashin Thorne Foundation, dedicated to supporting women in technology and business, with an initial endowment that made my head spin. He had named me as the acting chairperson. Cashin, this is too much, I whispered, overwhelmed. It's not enough, he said, taking the folder from my trembling hands and setting it aside. He took my hands in his. I spent half my life fueled by the need to take, to conquer, to acquire. You taught me that the greatest power lies not in what you can take, but in what you can build, together. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. It wasn't a monstrous diamond. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, was a simple, elegant platinum band, engraved on the inside with a single word, formidable. I know you don't need a ring to feel secure, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I know you don't need my name to have power. You have your own. But I would be honored if you would share it with me. Marry me, Alara. Be my partner, my empress, my equal in all things for all of our lives. Tears streamed down my face, tears of pure, unadulterated joy. I had run from one cage only to find that true freedom wasn't about being alone. It was about finding the one person who saw you, who challenged you, and who chose to build a better world alongside you. Yes, I whispered, my voice choked with tears. Yes, always yes. He slid the ring onto my finger, and it was a perfect fit. It wasn't a manacle or a contract. It was a promise that we were no longer just two individuals bound by circumstance, but a single, formidable force, ready to build our own empire, not of power or of wealth, but of a love that had been won in the heart of a war.